Welcome to Chapter 1 of the Christian Theological Tradition. First, we'll look at different types of religious studies as an academic discipline. Read through the chapter and find out what the difference between religious studies and the study of theology is. In our department at Xavier, we teach theology, and many other universities or colleges you will find their programs called religious studies. First, I want to talk about some psychological theories of religion. You read briefly about these. They focus primarily on religion as a social institution. First, there's William James. His most famous text relating to the psychology of religion is called Varieties of Human Experience. In this book, his interest is not really to focus on religious institutions or the rituals of these institutions or even religious ideas at all, but in the experiences and feelings that individual persons feel when they consider God or the divine. In this book, he sets out to talk about two major distinctions. One is the healthy-minded person, and the other is the sick soul. The healthy-minded person is one who has a deep sense of the goodness of life and, as James describes, a soul of sky blue tint. The sick soul, on the other hand, understands radical evil and is focused on being alone and being separated. Now, James believes some sick souls never get well, but others often can become twice born and become converted so that they can become a more healthy-minded person, and that's done through religion. Sigmund Freud has a much more negative interpretation of religion. In fact, he describes it as a fantasy structure from which a person must be set free if that person is to grow into maturity. According to Freud, belief in God originates from the wish to be able to experience in adulthood the security of fatherly protection against external threats. God, or gods, are psychological wishes projected onto a cosmic screen. These wishes are satisfied through religion. He argues that religion attempts to deal with the powerlessness of humans, but there's a problem here. Rather than being a means to empowerment, Freud suggests that power is only accessible in religion through self-denial and devaluation. Therefore, this means of empowerment is self-destructive. Carl Jung is another of that develop a theory of psychological theory of religion. Carl Jung has a much more positive view of religion than Freud. Carl Jung argues that there's a spiritual side to the unconscious, and this divine realm can be contacted through this unconsciousness. It's not something that we invent or make. It's a part of our unconsciousness. So although Carl Jung is similar to Freud in that we're connecting to something that's within us, he doesn't hold it as a projection or an idea that's a projection or an idea of wish fulfillment like Freud does. Joseph Campbell is also important, but he relies a lot on Carl Jung and others, and not really important for our study. Ninian Smart's 7 dimensions of religion are very important when looking at what the study of religion is about. The experiential or emotional are those experiences that drive us and we connect to in a religious sense. It's when someone has a connection to the other world. The social or institutional, sometimes we call those churches. You belong to a church or an institution. These are gatherings of people who've had these similar experiences of connecting experiential or emotional experiences, connecting them to the divine. And they gather, and usually these structures grow in size, and they usually support one another, and because they share that common experience. Sometimes in this group, people engage in the passing on of their experience through stories. That's the narrative or mythic dimension of religion. Sometimes these stories are written down, such as the Bible or other religious texts, and those narratives and myths also explain sometimes what experience they've had, but also inform them as to what their experiences mean. As religions develop, they try to create rules, and that's what the doctrinal or philosophical dimension would be, where people who are engaged in these groups will try to figure out how to live within those stories and what living within those stories entail. And a lot of this also results in biblical or authoritative texts. The practical or ritual dimension is how those engaged in the religion connect with the divine. Those kinds of rituals or events within their lives that help them to connect with the divine and also connect within the community. Many within the Christian tradition would call these sacraments or prayers or other types of rituals, such as baptism. Similar to the doctrinal and philosophical is the ethical and legal. The group decides what the rules are, how to live, based on a lot of times the doctrinal or the philosophical ideas of the religion itself. So they determine what you can do and what you can't do and what you should do. The last dimension is the material or artistic. Many times persons engaged in religion will sometimes feel compelled to express these emotions or experiences, and they often do that through art, through buildings, through songs, and other artistic means. I really like Corey's description of faith and how faith is not really parts of faith, not really step 1, step 2, step 3, but the Corey text talks about faith in 4 different ways. Authentic faith really should be composed of all of these. A belief or acceptance is really the beginning of faith, saying I trust in something but then not following or putting it into your life isn't really, in religious terms, considered faith. So faith is composed of belief, trust, and then putting that trust into some sort of action. And by putting that trust and belief in action, persons gain insight into God and are connected with God. And we'll talk about how action or praxis connects us to God in more detail when we talk about liberation theology later on in the semester. You can read about the subdivisions of Christian theology in the text. They're pretty simple. I wanted to point out that at Xavier we really divide our study of theology in 3 sections. One is biblical studies, where the biblical text is studied. The next would be kind of systematic theology, where moral theology is kind of a part of that in our program here. And then historical theology. This course is in the area of historical theology because we're studying the history of the Christian church and the doctrines and ideas throughout history.